We are here in Boston at the Jordan Hall in the New England Conservatory, and Hilary Hahn is rehearsing. Let's sneak a peek. Hi, Hilary.
Hi.
Would you like to take a short break and talk about music, life, and strings?
I'd love to.
Great, let's go.
Okay.
It's great to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time. Now, we picked you up from the Jordan Hall. What's another stage that you love to perform on?
I have a stage I really like playing on for solo repertoire, and it's in Tokyo. It's called Opera City. Opera City. I just think of it as Opera City. I think it's Opera City Music Hall. It's this beautiful, if you look up an image, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's this beautiful hall that seems to be as tall, ground to ceiling, as it is deep or wide, and it looks like a wooden pyramid from the stage. So I always feel like I'm playing inside of the instrument. It feels like the pyramid is playing the music, and I'm this tiny little ant, like inside the pyramid. And I'm playing, but I'm not generating it. So it's this funny experience of observing with my ears as I generate the actual music that I'm then enjoying. So it's about the closest I've ever gotten to being in the hall for one of my own performances. And then there are places that I love to play with orchestra, where the stage is bigger and the audience is bigger. I played at the Proms in Royal Albert Hall, and the excitement that the orchestra brought with them to be there, and the excitement of many more thousands of people than I normally get to play for, was such a contagious experience. It was really electrically charged, and I loved that. And one of my favorite halls for, I guess, collaborating with the hall itself, I did a residency at the Concerthaus in Vienna, and that is one of my favorite places to play. I feel like it's my musical home, so every time I go back there, I feel like I'm playing in my own house, and it's a very luxurious house at the Concerthaus. So it depends where I am, what I'm doing, but I like having places that I know what I'm going to experience in when I get there, yet it's also completely open because I know it and I don't have to get used to it, so I can just dive right into the musical experience immediately.
To fully immerse into music, you need reliability. On these different stages and places, what do you need to rely on?
I do pick up a lot from the people who are in that space with me. I think the physical difference of being on stage with adrenaline being heightened, it changes how you think about things, it changes how you hear sound, because you don't normally get a chance to practice on stage unless it's before a performance. And it's quite different playing in a hall that seats 2,000 people versus playing in a room that has furniture, and you're trying to find a place to stand where you're not going to hit the ceiling, not going to hit the wall. So the energy of performance makes a difference, the space, the way the sound travels, the way the audience provides that energy back when you're performing. And then also with colleagues, the ideas that they have that they're trying in a concert that you didn't hear in rehearsal, if you know your colleagues well, you just move together like you're one person made up of however many people are there. You don't have to think about it, you just play and you sense and you react to those sensations that you're getting from them. But the performance energy itself has always been something that I've really loved, and it always clicks a sort of higher creativity into gear for me. So I really look forward to performances. It's a place where I can just play the music, be in the music, be with other people who are doing the same thing, share this great experience, and it's a very isolated experience in a sense because it exists only in that space in which you're performing, and when you finish, it's gone. It's not like a painting. It's sound stops when you stop playing. So it's just this beautiful thing that brings everyone together, and I find that the best part of all of this work.
You mentioned Tokyo and Vienna earlier. Does traveling influence you as a musician?
It's funny, I feel like I know exactly what I'm doing when I travel, yet I'm often in places I've never been before, in a hotel room where I don't know where the light switches are. Sometimes I've just gone to bed after half an hour of trying to turn off the lights. Like, I give up. I don't know. I'll just pull the covers over my head and try to get some sleep. And you would think that that would be stressful, but it's a familiar unfamiliarity to me. And I really like every day walking out the door of wherever I'm staying and having a different set of options available to me. I can go to this museum, I can go to this park, I can go to this practice room today, and it's not going to be the same in 3 or 4 days, so I really want to enjoy it now. And I also know that I might come back, so I don't feel the urgency of tourism, where I know this is the time I'm here to do this and I may never get this chance again. So my favorite thing about touring is actually being part of the local landscape for just a little bit. When I work with other people, I get to feel what it's like to live there and be amongst a group of colleagues that interacts with that place and that particular building, that particular stage. It really feels great to be part of things in this world that are based in different places. But at the end of the day, I am the world that I bring with me. So when I go to different places, the common factor is me, and also the violin is the common factor for me. That's the thing that always goes with me when I travel for work. So it's just a very small thing, like this very small space that I occupy with the violin, yet in this tiny little bubble, we travel the world.
What's the biggest challenge when you are on tour?
The biggest challenge on tour is just knowing where things are. Where is the place you're going to get coffee in the morning? Where is the concert hall? Where am I staying? What room am I actually in? Those things. And they take up a lot of mental energy that you don't have to expend when you're at home and you do things automatically. So that challenge for me also is very creatively stimulating. But yeah, I have to not overschedule myself, just because I know that when I'm on the road, even though I want to do everything, it takes a certain amount of energy just to exist in a new space. So I try to allow myself time and space to do that. But yeah, probably the biggest challenge is getting enough sleep, because I work a lot. I work a lot behind the scenes, and I tend to work pretty much in one way or another every minute that is not otherwise committed. So I'll work up until I go to sleep, I'll wake up, I'll start working. But I love my work, and it's always in my head, and it's always part of me. So I like that overlap and that continuity.
Speaking of continuity, you've been playing with our dominant strings for a long time. What makes them the right match for you?
I feel so comfortable with them. I feel like I can achieve the sound that I want, and the tone quality is just what I'm looking for. So in a way, it's like, I don't know what it would be like to play with different hands, because these are the hands that I have. And it's nice to work with an instrument and strings together, where you know when you pull the instrument out of the case what you're going to start with that day. You're not starting from scratch every day. It's not a mystery. It's just you worked until a certain point yesterday, and you pick up at that point and you continue forward. I think with instruments and strings and bows, you have to feel like they're part of you. You have to not think about them. And I know it sounds maybe a little boring, that it's a good thing to not notice your strings, but for me, it makes a huge difference. I know when I move my bow to that string how it's going to speak. I know what I need to do to hit that particular note that I'm trying to hit at a certain time with a certain tone, with a certain attack in the middle of a performance, when I'm trying everything else new musically in the moment. It's really, I think it's really a symbiotic relationship. I don't remember not using dominants. As far as I can remember, when I was a student, I started using them. They were recommended. And then as I wanted a little bit more power, I was told that the silver wrapped D and G were really good for that, so I switched to that. And since then, that's just what I've stuck with. For me, they do the same thing in many different circumstances, and they allow me to continue to change my playing because I know what they're going to behave like every day. And part of that is just living so long with these strings, and part of it is knowing my instrument with these strings. But I really do find that they do everything that I need, and they help me get this beautiful sound on my instrument it's rich and has a little bit of an edge at the same time.
Are dominant strings like a partner you trust to explore music?
For me, yes. The dominants that I play are, I don't know, it's fun for me to play them because I know when I need a little bit more of an edge to my sound, I'll change the strings a couple days before. If I want a more consistent experience with what I've just been working on for the past month or two, I'll leave them on. I'll play on strings that are 6 months old or 4 days old. And for me, I can be the same musician. I can slightly change the tone quality by changing to new strings, but it doesn't require a break-in time for me. I can perform on new strings within 12 hours of putting them on because I know how to play them in and all of that. So for me, it's definitely a partnership with the strings, a partnership with the instrument. The strings and the instrument have to work together well, and bows act differently depending, which bow you have. Also, the hairs that are replaced on the bow change how the bow acts and how the string speaks. So I find that something that has consistency and something that I can anticipate the feel of string-wise is really important. Everything else is changing. The instrument is adjusting to humidity and altitude or whatever is happening, temperature, and the bow hairs are, despite, bow rehair best efforts, are different each time, and the pieces I'm playing are different, and throughout all of that I keep the same strings. So it's really a part of who I am as a player. The things that stay the same for me every day are also the things that travel with me through my musical life.
Dominant strings, like all Thomastik-Infeld strings, are made in Vienna, a city you have visited frequently. What is something you really love about Vienna?
My very favorite thing about Vienna is every time I'm there, I have these wonderful personal experiences where I cross paths with colleagues I haven't seen for 3 or 4 years that I really enjoyed working with, or I discover a new collaboration with someone I'm working with there, and somehow something about the vibe in Vienna, something about the air and the creativity and the history combined, for me feels very, very nurturing for artists discovering more of who they are, and for artists who are making connections with other artists that they don't normally get to be in the same city as. It's such a vibrant city, and there are so many concerts all the time that I've had some of my best concert-going experiences in Vienna, as well as some of my favorite performances.
Now tell the truth. Do you speak any German?
I do speak German. Ich spreche auch Deutsch. Aber meine Wörter sind gar nicht mit der Musik zu tun. Also ich kann über tägliche Dinge sprechen, aber über die Musik kann ich nicht. Because I studied German in a non-musical context. So I learned German initially at the conservatory, so some of that was musical, but the first years you're just learning how to say hello, my name is, and where is this, and how do I get here, and I would like to order this with, may I have a fork please, those kinds of things. And by the time I got to more advanced language, I was doing total immersion language courses at places that weren't the conservatory, so just general total immersion intensive language study. So it's this funny thing where I did a bunch of interviews in German when I was younger, and I learned a lot of vocabulary then, but the stuff that has stuck is the stuff that I drilled intensively in those language programs. Music is also a language, and what I found when I've learned a language of a composer that I then play, like I learned some Japanese and I worked with some Japanese composers, what I've found is that the mindset of the language often translates into the mindset of the musical grammar that a person will use. If you know some German and you get used to speaking it, and then you work on German repertoire, you don't need to know German to play German repertoire, but I find that certain things are self-explanatory. Same with French. Also, if you hear people who are from that country playing music by that composer who spoke the same mother tongue, there's something very natural about it. Everyone has something to contribute to music, whether they're from the country of the music or not. But it's interesting for me to think about it from a language perspective instead of a nationality perspective.
Are there particular pieces or composers that you would like to explore more?
I remember when I was pretty little, my teacher telling me, every time you open the music, look at it like it's new. And I just thought, what is that? It's not new though. I just practiced it yesterday. I've been practicing it for 4 weeks. How do I look at it like it's new? I already know it. And she would explain that you look at it like every note is fresh and you imagine that you've never heard it before. And I think through not understanding that, but remembering that at the time, something about that really stuck with me. And my nature is to try to see, does this change anything? Does this change anything? Does this change anything? Not big changes necessarily, but little things in every aspect every day. I'm always changing my decorations around my workspace at home, and I'm always like taking a different route to go somewhere. And I really like knowing more about the things that I know. So I think the exploring is not necessarily just about gathering experiences and checking things off a list. For me, it's about knowing the different facets of things that I think I already know. Because every time, for example, every time I play solo Bach in a concert, there's no one else playing with me. There's no one throwing ideas at me, no one saying, okay, we're gonna take this tempo today. But yet, every day I work on that music, I find something new in it that I've never noticed before. And I'm just working with 4 strings, basically four fingers to play the notes and 1 bow, and it goes in 2 directions. So how much variety could there be? But even though the notes are the same, everything about proportion in classical music can be changed constantly, and a tiny detail here has a big effect there if you think about it in terms of proportion, and if you think of music that's printed on a page as a set of relative indications rather than absolute dictated parameters. So through becoming a performer, I think I learned the value of experimenting, changing details, tweaking things here and there, and I just really love that process, so I guess I just do it in everything I do. I love doing soundtracks. I don't do a whole lot of them, but whenever I'm asked, I try to find a way to make it happen.
Why?
Because it's the opposite experience from having a score in front of you and trying to create your interpretation. And I don't mean necessarily create from nothing, but trying to figure out what it is that you believe you want to do with the music. Because with soundtracks, the music is just written before you show up. So it's almost like you're sight reading, or you are sight reading, yet the film has been done for a while and the music is the last thing. So you're looking at the scene and trying to convey the feelings that are already there through the music, through whatever notes just arrived in front of you. It almost feels like the emotion is already set, the story is already told, and you're trying to find a way to put that into the notes that you're playing and the technique that you're using. It's really quite the opposite process from getting the score, putting in fingerings, listening to recordings that exist. It's a really abstract and at the same time direct experience. And in one session for a soundtrack, I could tell that the composer had a personal, emotional relationship to that scene and to the music that he'd written for that scene, because he was sitting in the room and tears just started streaming down his face. And you don't necessarily have that kind of experience when you're doing a rehearsal under limited time for a piece that everyone knows and you're trying to find your path together. When someone is hearing their music for the first time for something that they wrote for a scene that's extremely emotional, it has this impact that I think carries over for the moviegoer as well.
So you never stop exploring?
I have a lot of interests and I'm curious about a lot of things. So in a sense, I am always exploring. I'm exploring with phrasing, with articulation, with technique. I actually change my technique daily. I change the angle of my hand. I change where I hold the violin. I change my bow grip. I'm always making sure that things feel as comfortable and organic as possible, so that even though playing violin is quite awkward when you break it down and it's not very ergonomically correct, I always want to be able to move with the instrument and through the instrument be able to move with the music. So I guess in a way I'm exploring, but it's always towards sort of the same goal of a sort of fluidity through my life and a fluidity through the playing, and really being able to stay on the path that the art draws me to. Well, in the past, I've thought that I wanted to know as much as possible about the broader world, about everyone outside myself. I studied a lot of foreign languages. I've put myself in a lot of situations like where I wasn't entirely in my comfort zone, so wilderness camping and travel as far away from home as possible. And I learned so much from all of that. And one thing I learned is that the things that you learn when you're very far away from yourself are also things you can learn when you go within yourself. So right now I'm really trying to explore what makes me me and stay as close to that as possible, allow myself to stay in the moment when I catch myself in the middle of the day trying to distract myself because something might feel a little uncomfortable. I just try to stay with that and pay attention to it, really look at the things around me and understand what's happening right in front of me to really be able to appreciate that.
What was the biggest thing you needed to figure out as a musician?
The biggest thing that I needed to figure out as a sort of approach to being a musician was when I graduated, I didn't quite know how to teach myself, and I looked for ways to learn from other people without being obviously studying with them. And to this day, I still take so much away from each performance and rehearsal with a colleague especially with conductors and orchestras that I have a very limited time with. I am listening extremely carefully to everything they're doing, and I also listen to what they say they're going to do and then what they actually do. And that's where I get my ideas for practicing that aren't self-generated these days. So I have continued studying my whole life. I started with Mrs. Berkovich, and then I went to Mr. Brodsky, and then I graduated, and I was looking for direction. I took some lessons with people. I coached with Jamie Laredo. I coached with Janos Starker, and I learned a lot from every person that I've worked with since. So I feel like I'm kind of a conduit for all of these different traditions, and it's just a matter of sorting out which is which on any given day.
Would you share with us the best piece of advice you ever got?
As I have visited with Mrs. Berkovich as a grown-up, she still lives in Baltimore and still lives in the same place where I took my lessons with her. She says this thing every time I go to visit, which is kind of, she sees it as her slogan in a way, which is always ask questions. And I assume she was saying that to me when I was a kid. I just didn't think much of it. But I think that the things that she taught me about always looking for connections and inspiration and respecting other art forms. I remember she emigrated from Russia shortly before I met her, and of course didn't bring a whole lot with her. And one of the things she brought with her was like a book of art from the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And she would show me pictures of these great works of art. And as a kid, I didn't know how to connect them, but I loved drawing. I loved visual art myself, and I took ballet, and so I was a very artsy kid. But she would encourage me to go to museums and read and do the ballet and do the drawing and really just try to explore art as a whole world. And to this day, now when I go to museums, I look at the way a painter made the brush strokes, and I imagine, because I work with the bow, and it's the brush I imagine as a non-painter. To me, the brush is a little bit like the bow, because you are trying to express something through this object that is between, you're touching the object, but it's between you and the art that emerges. So with the bow, I'm touching the bow, but I'm not touching the music. But I'm trying to communicate the music through the bow, through the left hand on the strings. A painter is communicating what they're trying to communicate through a brush to the viewer. The viewer never actually sees the brush, they see the painting. And there was a time when I was really trying to figure out, after I'd graduated, when I didn't have a teacher, but I needed some self-direction and I didn't know how to do it yet. I was trying to figure out some things about tone, and I couldn't really crack this particular challenge, and I couldn't figure out where to start. So I listened to recordings of rock singers and pop singers whose tone quality I liked, and I tried to get that in my ear. I went to museums and I looked at the brush strokes, and I was just trying to figure out all different ways of thinking about bowing, thinking about the way I get the string to sound at the beginning of the note. How do I draw the sound out of the instrument? And I really think that looking to other art forms was inspired by Mrs. Berkovich's encouragement of thinking of classical music as part of the greater art world.
On a completely different topic, what are 5 things you always carry with you?
Well, ID, because if I'm driving or if I'm at the airport, I want to travel, I always want to have my ID. For some reason, I usually have a drawing that someone made for me, whether it's fan art that's in my suitcase, or my family member drew something for me and it's in my violin case, or something a friend drew and gave to me and I put it on the wall. of my workspace. So it's ID, drawing, a snack. I always have snacks with me because I'm always getting hungry. I can't say always the violin, but most of the time, coincidentally, the violin. But I don't take it camping, so I can't say that. So let's see, 2, 3. I travel. I seem to travel heavy, but I actually travel pretty light. Like those are the things I take with me. What else do I have? Oh, keys. I always need to get back home in some way, whether it's a hotel room or my home. And I always have to have my phone with me because everything goes from the phone these days.
Do you have a lucky charm?
I wouldn't say it's a lucky charm, but it's something that travels in my case with me. There's a little medal, sort of. It looks like a little medal, and it's this I really shouldn't carry it in my case, but because it's very heavy. It's small and very heavy, but it's sort of a little, like a little medal that has an insignia on it, and it was given to me by the director of the Army Band when we played together in a concert at the Spanish Embassy years back when I was working on some premieres by the Spanish composer Anton Garcia Abril, and it was his birthday concert. He happened to be in DC, and so the Spanish Embassy put on a whole performance of his works, and it was a wonderful experience, and there was a reception honoring him afterwards. And the Army director gave me this and said, so this is tradition in our culture that if we ever cross paths and you don't have this with you, you have to buy me a drink. I was like, no one has ever given me this before. I need to always have it with me. I want to honor the system. So I always have that with me. And then when I was working in, it was in Japan. I was working in Japan recently. I sold out the hall and it was a solo recital. And someone from the hall gave me this thing that I always carry in my case because it's supposed to invite even more positive experiences in your work, even more, success and connections with people. And so it's this little envelope with a little something inside. And it's supposed to be sort of like a lucky charm for your work. And it's nice. It reminds me of this really exciting time when I was discovering who I was, even after years performing, but discovering who I was as a solo artist.
Your professional life is about practicing, rehearsing, and performing. To you, what does life resemble most?
Let's talk through this. If it's a performance, then it's always gearing towards other people. Because for me, when I'm performing, I'm not performing for myself. I'm performing in the space with other people. And everyone greatly affects the feeling of the performance. And also, I know that people are there, so I'm performing to communicate with them. Like I'm really reaching out a lot and putting a lot of energy outwards. I personally am someone who doesn't actually like being the center of attention. I feel weird if people are like looking at me in the room, or like if so there's an actor who said that he regretted becoming famous because it kept him from observing people. And I really like people watching, and fortunately I've been able to get to where I want to get in my work without losing the ability to just be anonymous on the street. So I kind of like being in my own world. I like being self-sufficient. I like not being observed all the time. And when I'm on stage, I don't feel like when I'm performing I'm being watched. I feel like I'm part of something bigger. So I wouldn't say though that I wouldn't say that life for me is a performance, because it's more about exploring the experience of it. So I would say it's more like practice, except you don't redo things. Like, you are where you are, you go where you go. You don't like go back and do it again immediately. You're like, oh, I don't like how I left the house. Let me close the door, go back inside, and let me try that exit again. So if I were to practice life, that's what it would look like. I would do it over and over. I would do each thing I did in the day again and again until I liked how it felt to do it. And that's just not, that's not practical. You do it the way you do it, and you go to the next thing, and that thing is the way it is because of how you arrived there, and you go on. So I think that I think I would turn that question around. I don't see life as practice or rehearsal or performance. I think that it is what it is. You're in it, you're doing it. It's a combination of everything. But a performance is more like that than like the culmination of all of the practice and rehearsing, because in the performance, you are living. I mean, you're basically just living the music. You can't stop and go back and do it again. You just go through the flow of it. One thing leads to another, and you arrive where you arrive, and you work with that. And the people who are there provide the spontaneous change you can't anticipate. Kind of like when you go to the grocery store, there's someone in line in front of you. You didn't see that in your head. That kind of thing will change your day. So yeah, I think performing is more like living life than like doing a presentation. But I wouldn't say that living life is like performing, because you don't have 2,000 people usually watching you do everything that you do in life. It's this interesting cycle of things. There's no one aspect of being a musician that explains all of what it's like to live your life, but I think performance is a metaphor for a lot of things. So you can bring whatever you like with you onto that stage and put it into the music however you like. And people arrive at the hall with their day inside of them. They bring it with them however they feel, whether they were rushed or they took their time. And they all arrive individually. They're all in the middle of their day, yet you intersect in this time with all of these people, but you don't necessarily say anything to each other, but you experience it together. I think that's a really unique kind of circumstance that can't be replaced by anything else.